The Cryptid Primate Convention.
In the Northern Territory of Canada, a gathering took place that only happened once every decade. It was too dangerous to meet more than that. A time when the hominids of the world, except for humans, came together to meet, trade, and find mates. The Yetis didn't have as much to fear, for their territories rested in the far north and south where humans had yet to invade. But the wood apes of the lower north and the Sasq'ets of the south had more run-ins, and the occurrences increased every year. There was a time when they lived side by side with humans, but those times ended with the expansion of Europeans and their Christianity. Those who had once been friends began calling them animals or demons. It eventually escalated into violence so fierce that they were forced to retreat to the most remote parts of the world to rebuild. For Ice of the Carpodome, the gathering was a chance to hear what was going on in the Southern Territories. So when his clan leader asked if anyone wanted to come, he jumped at the chance. There was nothing he could do about it, but he still wanted to know. His clan lived in the far north, living off seals and the occasional whale. They had dens below ground to shelter them from the cold, and encountering a human was nearly unheard of. And when it did happen, the human usually thought them a trick of the eye, their white fur helping them blend in nearly perfectly with the landscape. Or a polar bear. Either way, they stayed hidden. But their southern brethren weren't so lucky. He'd already heard news of several clans that had been forced to relocate because of forest fires. Thankfully, that was a problem his people didn't have. Ivy stared wide-eyed at the number of people that crowded the convention, a kaleidoscope of white, brown, and black. She'd never seen so many people in one place. Her small Sasq'ets clan only numbered 24, and there had to be hundreds present here. Her hopes of finding another clan to transfer to rose. She wanted to find a mate, but she had already excluded all the males in her own clan, and she wouldn't settle just to satisfy that desire. The convention had set up a section for speed dating, and though she wasn't keen on the idea, she was considering it. In order to keep the convention secret, the buildings were painted white and nestled amongst the trees. In order to not have to cut anything down, the buildings were shaped around them, which made for some interesting configurations as she tried to navigate her way. Pine crossed his arms over his chest and glared at the crowd. How could they act like nothing was wrong, that the humans weren't taking over and destroying any chance they had at a future? The forest his wood ape clan had lived in was carbon and ash, and they'd been forced to move further into the mountains to escape the blaze before the humans contained it, which, given that it was their fault. With nowhere else to go, his entire family had made their way here, the paltry 6 that were left. 6 out of what had been a clan of 38. The others had gone to the clans of relatives rather than make the journey. His parents were here somewhere, but they had left him and his little brother to explore on their own. Pine, relax. This is supposed to be exciting and fun, Cone begged. His little brother was the eternal optimist. How can they act like everything's fine? Because there's nothing we can do about it. You can't let the bad keep you from experiencing the good. Walk around, talk to people, flirt with a couple of females. Heck, take one into the trees and get laid. Just stop killing the mood. Cone planted his fists on his hips and glowered in a manner that promised repercussions if he didn't. When did you get so pushy? When you turned into a grump, he chided, poking Pine in the ribs with a finger. Knowing full well what his brother was capable of, he gave in. Fine, I'll give this thing a chance. I still think it's ridiculous. You can think it's ridiculous as long as you're having fun doing it, was Cone's absurd retort. Pine just shook his head as he followed his brother into the crowd.
The convention had planned a number of seminars on various issues. What laws the clan council was planning on putting in place, population growth or lack of it, to how to find the mate of your dreams. There were support groups for those who'd had run-ins with humans, or had been a victim of human actions. There were organized sporting events that people could sign up for. A clinic had been set up for those who might not have access to a healer and needed medical attention. There was even a sales floor where vendors hawked their various wares. But none of it really caught Ice's attention. He didn't need a seminar to tell him that his brethren in the South were having a hard time. The conversations were going on all around him. He was starting to wonder why they didn't just move further north like his people. They never had to worry about fires or human development forcing them out of their homes. An announcement came over the PA system that the opening ceremonies were about to start. Figuring there was no reason not to, he followed the crowd to the auditorium. The auditorium was standing room only, and Ivy had to make her way to the front to be able to see anything. She'd never been especially big, but there were some here that made her feel downright tiny.
On stage was a group roughly 20 to 30 in size, representatives of the governing bodies of their people. At one time, each subspecies had their own government, but they didn't have the numbers for that anymore. So the different tribes had come together and joined as one, at least theoretically. It took a few more minutes for the representatives to get themselves put together enough to start the ceremony. Glacier Icefield stepped to a podium and addressed the crowd. People of the wilds, I thank you for taking the time to be here today for this gathering. I know it wasn't easy for many of you. Our people have faced hardship, many losing their homes and livelihoods due to the many disasters that have plagued us over the last few years. Fire, floods, and spreading human habitation have displaced many and taken the lives of others. During this convention, we'll be holding public forums for those who wish to voice their concerns, and we'll be holding constant meetings to see what can be done to ease your burdens. But this is not just for legislative work. This is also for us to come together, to strengthen bonds and form new ones, to celebrate new life and mourn those we have lost, to come together as one people and celebrate. So to help steer us in the right direction, Redwood Nocturne, who has been instrumental in coordinating this event, has a few announcements. Redwood stepped to the podium. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Just to give you an idea of the layout, all seminars and public meetings will be held here. The schedule is at the back of the room, and there are handouts available. She continued relaying some other logistics that Ivy wasn't really interested in, though she would probably regret that later. She was more interested in scoping out the crowd. Though it was a sea of different colors, Yetis definitely dominated. If you combined all the Sasq'ets and wood apes, they would make up about half of those gathered. That could just be because this location had been more accessible to them. At least that's what Ivy hoped. Pine didn't care what the council had to say unless the announcement was that they were going to start fighting back. He tried to enjoy the convention for Cone, but it was no good. Every time he saw a family or someone who'd obviously come all this way because they needed help, it enraged him. His people were dying a slow death, and the council was letting it happen. Here's your stop, Cone chirped before trying to push him toward a doorway. What are you doing? He looked over his shoulder as his brother pushed against his back to no effect. I didn't realize how bad it was. Bro, you need this. Cone pointed at the sign next to the doorway. Pine scowled. I do not need a support group. You haven't smiled once the whole time we've been here. Not even when we saw those Arctic fox cubs at the pet vendor. Dude, who doesn't smile at cubs? You need to talk to someone and deal with your anger issues. I get it sucked that we had to move, but you're acting like you're ready to go to war or something. They're killing us. Of course I'm pissed and want to do something about it. He snarled so angrily at Cone that he actually backed up. Wiping his hand over his face to calm down, he sighed. Look, I didn't mean to snap at you, but can we drop this? Cone's chin firmed in a way that said no. If you're really sorry, you'll get in there, he countered, pointing at the doorway. If I do, will you leave me alone? Absolutely. All right, let's go then, Pine conceded, leading the way. Ice watched as a pair of wood apes argued at the entrance to the support group and counseling area. From what he could hear, it sounded like they were brothers and the younger one was trying to get the older one to go. Shaking his head, counseling. The wood apes and Sasq'ets had some weird ideas. Yetis didn't need counseling, but he was curious, so he followed them. The room was divided into two sections. One was auditorium style. The other was comprised of cubicles for what he assumed were one-on-one sessions. Heading over to the group area, he took a seat in the back row. Looking around, he realized he was one of the few Yetis there, and the others were near the back like he was. A Sasq'et stood at the podium. We could hear the trees falling behind us, the groaning of the humans' machines as they tore them to the ground and ripped up the earth. This went on for days, and every time we thought we could rest, they would catch up with us again. It got to the point where we didn't stop. We just kept moving further and further away until we couldn't see where the forest ended if we climbed the highest tree. But still, we didn't feel safe. So we kept moving and didn't stop until we came here. Thank you. The crowd clapped as the Sasq'ets stepped down. Thank you for sharing. Who would like to go next? The person he assumed was the one running this room asked the crowd. The wood-ape brother that had drawn him in got up after an elbow to the ribs from a smaller sibling. Pine didn't want to do this, but he knew his brother. He was like a wolf with a bone, and the more he fought, the more Cone would try to get him to do it. It was just easier to get it over with. So rising to his feet, he headed to the podium. Just introduce yourself and then say whatever it is you want to say, the coordinator advised before stepping away. Right, introduce. Rubbing the back of his neck, he began. Hi everyone, I'm Pine. I guess I'm here because I'm angry. At least that's what my brother says. There were a few chuckles from the crowd. But I think it's okay to be angry. A feeling of self-righteousness lifted him. We were living west near the coast when the fire started. It destroyed our home and we can't go back. For days we ran, trying to make it to the mountains. And as if the fire wasn't bad enough, we had to keep dodging human fire crews. It seemed like they were everywhere. And even though they were trying to put the fire out, I still hated them. They've hurt so many people. I just wanted to crush everyone I saw. He balled his hands into fists. They're destroying everything, and our council is letting them do it. So yes, I'm angry. I'm angry for any one of us that's had to run for fear of discovery by humans. I'm angry for everyone who's had their homes destroyed because of human carelessness. I'm angry because they dare to call us animals and monsters. Realizing he was breathing hard as if he had been running, he forced himself to stop until he'd regained control. Thank you, he finished, leaving the podium to the sound of applause. Ice watched as Pine left the podium and sat back down next to his brother. Is that what the southern clans were getting all upset about? The solution seemed simple to him. Pick up and move north like his people. They hardly ever saw humans. Getting up from his seat to leave, two other Yetis that had been in the audience followed him. Pausing at the doorway, he debated what he wanted to do next. Most of the political talks weren't until later in the day, and he wasn't sure he was that interested. There was supposed to be a game of tree ball later in the stadium. Not that he wanted to play, but a rough game was always fun to watch, so he headed in that direction. Ivy was still trying to figure out what she wanted to do when she found herself at the stadium, a term she used loosely. The field had rows of seats that looked like they'd been made from scrap wood, and the roof was a net that was stuffed with branches. She'd walked in on a game of tree ball, their version of the humans' football, but a little different. Not only did the players have to get the ball from one side of the field to the other, but they had to do it while dodging around trees. Though they were also allowed to use the trees to their advantage, as one player demonstrated when he used a high branch to climb over his competitor. Basically a football field merged with a jungle gym. It looked like the teams included a combination of all three tribes. They didn't have actual leagues, so every player had volunteered for this. And going by the scoreboard, one team wasn't doing so well. The score was currently 13-0. The stands were only about half full, so she was free to sit where she liked. She wasn't really into sports, feeling they were a waste of time and energy. But others enjoyed it, and she could appreciate that. She could also appreciate the display of physical prowess it provided. She didn't like the direction things were heading, but the referee seemed oblivious, or just didn't care. It was in the third quarter things finally erupted. The Yeti from the losing team roared when the other side scored again, charging at the Sasq'et that had made the goal. He picked the smaller hominid up and smashed him to the ground before falling on him in a whirlwind of fists. All the players rushed in to separate the two, and the referee uselessly blew their whistle. The fight only lasted a few minutes, and convention security restrained and took away the Yeti who'd started the fight. But it was enough to spoil the event for her, and she stood to leave. The speed dating would start soon, and though it wasn't her preference, she only had until the end of the convention to find a new clan. If she had to go home, it would likely be another decade before she saw another male that wasn't a member of her own clan. "You okay?" came a voice from over her shoulder. Turning around, she found a Yeti behind her, watching her with concern. "Fine. Why?" "You just look sad. Do you know the player that got pummeled?" The male jerked his thumb over his shoulder. Shaking her head, she explained, "No, I just don't like the violence. All over a silly game." "Yeah, it didn't impress me either. No reason for the guy to lose his temper like that. I was heading out to look for something else to do. Care to join me?" He seemed like a nice enough guy, based solely on the few sentences he'd spoken so far. "Sure, I'm Ivy." "Ice. Did you have something you wanted to catch? I'm kind of at loose ends until the council talks this evening." "You're a council member?" "Haha, no. I just want to hear what they have to say. Probably the same stuff they've been saying for decades. If we stay hidden, we'll be safe, blah, blah, blah. Though that doesn't seem to be working out so well." She didn't want to mention the speed dating. Telling a guy you were looking for a mate was a surefire way to scare him off, and this Ice seemed like someone she'd like to get to know. "I didn't really have anything in mind. I haven't been to the vendors yet." She trailed off. Not sure how this guy would feel about eye shopping. "We can check it out. I think they have some demos going on there too," he agreed, heading in the direction of the vendor hall. Restraining herself from squealing, she followed him. The vendor hall was much what one would expect. Rows of tables and a few tents held everything a hominid would need, from seeds and plants, leather goods, iron tools and hardware, and fabrics. They didn't live as materialistically as humans, but they still liked their comforts. Ice let Ivy oogle the fox cubs, though she could never have one. Any human who saw their pure white coat would know that they didn't belong in her homeland of lush forests. That and the poor thing would probably be miserable. While they wandered together around the hall, she did end up buying a new knife. Her clan didn't have a smith, and good blades were priceless. She raised a brow when Ice bought a wall hanging of a polar bear with two cubs. "For my mother," he confessed, blushing when he noticed her staring. They watched a glass blower form a bottle, a smith make an axe, and a leather worker stretch a piece of hide so thin it was nearly translucent for use as parchment. She decided that Ice was good company and was thinking about maybe asking a few personal questions when an announcement was made that the public meeting with the council would begin soon. "Do you want to come?" Ice asked before she could say anything. "Sure." She wasn't quite ready to let go of him just yet. Pine and Cone were two of the first to enter the auditorium for the public council meeting. This was the main reason Pine was here. He knew Cone believed he was here to keep him out of trouble, but even his little brother wouldn't be able to stop him from saying what he wanted to say. Glacier Icefield was again the first to speak. "Welcome all. This is a public meeting where individuals will be able to speak and ask questions of the council. We ask that this remain orderly and please only speak up when you've been acknowledged by the moderator. Though follow-up questions and clarification requests will be allowed, we've instituted a 5-minute limit for all participants in order to give everyone a chance to take part. So please be ready when you're called upon." Stepping back from the podium, he took his place amongst the other representatives. Redwood Nocturne took the podium next. "All right, as Mr. Icefield said, let's try to keep this orderly. If you wish to speak, please raise the paddle you were given at the entrance. When I call the number on your paddle, you'll have 5 minutes to ask your question and any follow-ups." Willing to follow the rules for now, Pine raised his paddle. 27? Nocturne called, selecting a Sasq'ets. Rising to his feet, the hominid looked nervous. "The council is getting ready to increase the distance requirement regarding living in proximity to humans from 50 miles to 75 miles. What assistance is the council prepared to give those who live within the new radius of a human settlement?" "That will have to be on an individual basis, as different clans will have different aid requirements. Could you be more specific?" A female wood ape on the council answered. Pine didn't know her name. "My clan lives within the new human boundary. Moving would mean going deeper into the mountains. It could take weeks, maybe months, to find a location where we can survive, and I know others who are in similar situations. I'm sorry to hear that you're one of those affected by this decision, but we believe it's what's safest for everyone. We currently have survey and relocation teams standing by to help those who need to relocate. You and anyone else will just have to submit a request. Thank you, Chancellor. That's all I had. The Sasq'ets finished, sitting back down. 55? A burly Yeti rose to his feet. It's been observed that more wood apes and Sasq'ets are moving north and south into what were traditionally our territories. They've even begun mating into our clans. Some of us don't approve of this development. Though we have agreed to work together, we're still not the same. The other tribes should remain in their territories and solve their own problems. The Council is well aware of your opinion and the opinion of your contemporaries, Arctic Glass, and they've been overruled. If the more equatorial tribes are discovered due to being forced to live in dangerous territory, it will only be a matter of time before that comes to the Yeti's door. We will continue to offer what assistance we can, even if it means every member of the southern tribes relocates to Yeti territory. Glacier Icefield warned from between clenched teeth, his hands balled into fists. And if that's not acceptable to us, you'll deal with it. Icefield rose to his feet. If all you're going to do is spout your isolationist propaganda, you can leave. I'll leave, but this isn't over. The Yeti dropped his paddle and headed for the door. The room erupted in whispers. The whole convention would know about this before the day was out. Settle down, settle down. Let's not give him any more attention than he's owed, which is none. Miss Nocturne, if you would. Icefield gestured for her to continue. 42? Pine stood as his number was called. You speak of relocation and assistance, but what happens when that isn't enough? What if some of us don't want to live underground in barren wastelands? When do we stop running and fight instead? Fight, Icefield repeated as if he was speaking an alien language. He stood and approached the edge of the stage. I understand you're scared and angry, as so many are. I can understand you're looking for ways to take back control of your life. But we have to be realistic. Humans outnumber us by millions. It wouldn't be a fight, it would be our extinction. We're already going extinct, and you're sitting back and letting it happen, telling us to run and hide, run and hide. We can't run and hide forever. And we won't. But we won't be making the first move. Maple Ash, one of the counselors, spoke up. Getting to her feet and standing next to Glacier, she placed a hand on his shoulder. We were going to announce it later in the convention, but now's as good a time as any, I think. We've received word from the Mer. They're going to be revealing themselves to the humans, and they're much more powerful than we are. The Fae of Europe are considering the same thing. How the humans react to them will determine what we do in the future. Pine's face screwed up in thought. You're going to use them to clear the way? And weaken the humans before we take part if they prove less than accepting? Ash confirmed. But we have to bide our time, prepare, get our vulnerable to safety. We can't work in haste. That's why everyone needs to relocate to safe harbor as soon as possible. The announcement caused the entire room to break out in conversation, and Pine sat down, his chest unclenching for the first time in what felt like months. They weren't going to run forever. See, I told you, Cone gloated. Without a word, he wrapped his arm around his little brother's neck and proceeded to noogie him, laughing when he wiggled and squirmed to get loose. Ice felt an unease growing in his chest. If the Mer and the Fae came out to the humans, it might encourage them to look for other species they thought didn't exist, and it would turn into a monster hunt. And unlike the Mer that could just disappear into the ocean, or the Fae that could just hop into a portal and go back to their own world, there were many species that didn't have either of those options. Well, that wasn't what I expected to hear, Ivy muttered next to him. I don't think anybody did. A few more questions were asked and answered, but after the bombshell, they just didn't seem that important.
You ready to go? I just wanted to get out of there, but didn't want to end the day with Ivy. Yeah, it looks like they're almost done anyway. Ivy followed him out of the auditorium. So that was unexpected. Ice was curious what she, as a member of a southern clan, thought of the whole thing. Yeah, I mean, I figured they'd have to do something, eventually. This whole cat and mouse game can't go on forever. I will miss my forest when I move north, she corrected, her shoulders slumping. The north isn't so bad. It's quiet and the seal is good. Seal? You've never had seal? He stared at her wide-eyed. We don't really have seal in the south. Not to eat, anyway. Then come have lunch with me and I'll introduce you. He'd even pay. She wasn't that big, so how much could she eat anyway? I'd love to. A spark returned to her eye. Offering his hand, which she eagerly took, he led her off to the cafeteria.